Have you ever loved somebody so deeply that you ignored the warning signs? You saw the red flags, but you called them misunderstandings. You felt something wasn't right, but you kept giving chances. You heard promises, believed the words, invested your heart, your time, your loyalty. And then one day, you discovered that the person you trusted was never as invested as you were. Now you're hurt, you're angry, you're disappointed. And if you're being completely honest, there's a part of you that wants him to feel exactly what you're feeling right now. You want him to realize what he lost. You want him to understand the value he took for granted. You want him to wake up one morning with the painful realization that he let a good woman walk away. But today, I'm going to tell you something that might completely change the way you look at heartbreak. The biggest mistake you can make after someone plays you is making your entire life about proving something to them. Because the moment your happiness depends on their regret, they're still controlling your life. Read that again. If your peace depends on whether he misses you, regrets you, calls you, or comes back, then he's still occupying space in your mind rent-free. And that's not power, that's emotional dependence. See, life has a funny way of teaching lessons. Sometimes the people who hurt you become the reason you discover your strength. Sometimes the betrayal that almost broke you becomes the wake-up call that transforms your entire future. And sometimes the greatest blessing arrives disguised as a painful goodbye. So if you've been crying over someone who played with your heart, if you've been wondering why you weren't enough, if you've been waiting for an apology that may never come, this message is for you. Because by the end of this conversation, I don't want you focused on making him regret losing you. I want you focused on becoming the kind of person who no longer needs his regret to feel valuable. And trust me, that's when everything changes. That's when your confidence comes back. That's when your power returns. And that's when the person who thought they could play you realizes they underestimated someone they should have never taken for granted. The moment someone hurts you, rejects you, or walks away after taking your love for granted, your first instinct is often to make them see what they lost. You want them to recognize your value. You want them to feel the pain they caused. You want them to realize that they made a mistake. Those feelings are completely understandable because heartbreak has a way of making us focus on the person who left instead of the person who remains. We become consumed by thoughts of what they are doing, who they are talking to, whether they miss us, and whether they regret their decision. The problem is that this mindset keeps your future tied to someone who has already demonstrated they are willing to let you go. Many people believe the greatest victory after heartbreak is hearing an apology. They imagine the day that person returns, admitting they were wrong and begging for another chance. They think that moment will finally bring peace and satisfaction. But what often happens is that people spend months or even years waiting for something that may never come. Their happiness becomes dependent on another person's realization. Their healing becomes dependent on another person's regret. Their confidence becomes dependent on another person's approval. That is giving away far too much power. The most effective response to being played, lied to, or taken for granted is not revenge. It is transformation. It is making a decision that the pain you experienced will become fuel instead of a prison. It is choosing to invest your energy into yourself rather than wasting it on someone who has already shown you where you stand in their priorities. Transformation begins when you stop asking, how do I make them regret losing me? And start asking, how do I become the best version of myself? That single shift changes everything. Instead of monitoring their life, you start building your own. Instead of focusing on their choices, you focus on your growth. Instead of trying to prove your value, you start recognizing it for yourself. One of the most powerful things a person can do after heartbreak is reconnect with their own goals. So many people lose themselves in relationships. They put their dreams on hold. They stop pursuing hobbies. They neglect friendships. They postpone personal ambitions. Their entire world starts revolving around another person. Then, when that person leaves, they feel empty because they have forgotten who they are outside of the relationship. This is why transformation matters. It forces you to rediscover yourself. It reminds you that your identity is bigger than any relationship. You are not just someone's partner, someone's option, or someone's memory. You are an individual with talents, goals, dreams, and potential that exist independently of anyone else's opinion. Growth also creates confidence. Real confidence is not built through compliments or validation from others. It is built through keeping promises to yourself. Every time you work toward a goal, learn a new skill, improve your health, strengthen your mindset, or overcome a challenge, you prove to yourself that you are capable. That kind of confidence cannot be taken away by a breakup or rejection because it is rooted in your actions, not someone else's approval. Another important truth is that transformation changes the way you view the situation itself. Right now, the pain may feel overwhelming. It may feel like you lost something valuable. But as you grow, your perspective changes. You begin to see lessons where you once saw only disappointment. You begin to recognize red flags you ignored. You begin to understand standards you should have maintained. What once felt like a devastating loss gradually becomes an important turning point in your life. Ironically, this is often the point when regret shows up. Not because you chased it, demanded it, or tried to force it. Regret appears when someone sees that you did not allow their actions to destroy you. It appears when they realize you became stronger, happier, and more successful without them. It appears when they recognize that the person they underestimated continued moving forward while they expected them to remain stuck. But by that stage, something remarkable has happened. Their regret no longer matters as much as it once did. The reason is simple. You are no longer living for their reaction. You are living for your own future. You are no longer motivated by proving them wrong. You are motivated by becoming better than you were yesterday. The greatest revenge has never been bitterness. It has never been obsession. It has never been spending years trying to make someone suffer. The greatest revenge is creating a life that you genuinely love. A life filled with purpose, growth, confidence, peace, and self-respect. When you transform yourself, you win regardless of whether they regret their choices or not. And that is true power, because your happiness is no longer controlled by the person who hurt you. It is controlled by the person you choose to become, Dot. One of the hardest things to accept after someone hurts you is that you may never get the explanation you believe you deserve. When a relationship ends badly, when someone lies, cheats, disappears, or suddenly changes their behavior, the mind naturally starts searching for answers. You replay conversations. You revisit old memories. You analyze every text message, every promise, and every moment, hoping to discover the exact reason things fell apart. You tell yourself that if you could just understand what happened, then you could finally move on. The challenge is that life doesn't always provide neat endings. Not every person will sit down with you and tell the truth. Not every person will apologize sincerely. Not every person will admit their mistakes. Some people leave confusion behind and never look back. Others create excuses that only raise more questions. And some simply disappear, leaving you to carry the emotional weight of an unfinished story. This is where many people become trapped. They convince themselves that closure is something another person must give them. They believe healing cannot begin until they receive the perfect explanation. As a result, they remain emotionally attached long after the relationship has ended. They keep checking social media. They keep reopening conversations. They keep hoping for one final discussion that will somehow make everything make sense. What they don't realize is that the search for closure can become more damaging than the original heartbreak. Every time you revisit the past looking for answers, you reopen wounds that are trying to heal. Every time you chase an explanation, you keep your emotional energy invested in someone who may no longer deserve it. Every time you wait for another person to help you move forward, you place your future in their hands. Real closure works differently. Real closure begins when you accept that some questions may never be answered in a way that satisfies you. That can be uncomfortable because people naturally want certainty. We want reasons. We want logic. We want to understand why someone who claimed to care could suddenly hurt us. But there are situations where no explanation will ever feel good enough. Even if you received an answer today, it might not erase the pain. It might not restore your trust. It might not change what happened. The truth is that closure is less about understanding another person's behavior and more about accepting reality. Acceptance does not mean you approve of what happened. It does not mean you excuse someone's actions. It does not mean you pretend the pain wasn't real. Acceptance simply means acknowledging the facts without fighting them. The relationship ended. The person made their choice. The situation cannot be changed by replaying it 1,000 times in your mind. Once you accept those realities, something powerful happens. Your energy begins to shift away from the past and toward the future. Many people underestimate how much emotional energy is consumed by resistance. When you constantly argue with reality, you stay stuck. You spend your days thinking about what should have happened, what could have happened, and what would have happened if only things had been different. Meanwhile, life continues moving forward. Acceptance allows you to stop fighting battles that are already over. It allows you to stop negotiating with memories. It allows you to stop waiting for someone else to fix what they broke. One of the greatest acts of self-respect is recognizing that your healing does not require another person's participation. You do not need their apology to rebuild your confidence. You do not need their explanation to rediscover your happiness. You do not need their approval to continue growing. Too many people postpone their healing while waiting for a conversation that may never happen. They tell themselves they will move on after receiving closure. The reality is that moving on is often what creates closure in the first place. As you focus on your goals, your health, your personal growth, and your future, the questions that once consumed you begin to lose their power. The answers become less important because your life becomes bigger than the situation itself. You start realizing that the person who hurt you is no longer the center of your story. You are. There's also a deeper lesson hidden within every painful ending. Sometimes closure comes from recognizing what the experience taught you. Maybe it taught you to trust your instincts. Maybe it taught you to establish stronger boundaries. Maybe it taught you not to ignore red flags. Maybe it taught you how strong you truly are when life becomes difficult. Painful experiences often leave behind valuable wisdom if you are willing to learn from them. That wisdom becomes far more valuable than any explanation another person could provide. The people who heal the fastest are not always the people who received answers. They are often the people who stopped waiting for answers. They made peace with uncertainty. They accepted that some chapters end without complete understanding. They chose to focus on what they could control rather than what they couldn't. And that's where freedom begins. Freedom begins when you stop chasing closure from someone else and start creating it for yourself. It begins when you decide that your future is more important than your unanswered questions. It begins when you stop looking backward for permission to move forward. Because the truth is simple. The person who hurt you may never explain themselves. They may never apologize. They may never understand the damage they caused. But your life does not have to remain on hold because of that. You can heal anyway. You can grow anyway. You can be happy anyway. And sometimes, the most powerful closure of all is reaching a point where the answers you once desperately wanted no longer matter because you have already moved on. When someone hurts you, disappoints you, or betrays your trust, your emotions naturally rise to the surface. Anger, sadness, frustration, confusion, and even the desire for revenge can all appear at once. In those moments, it feels almost impossible to stay calm. Your mind races with thoughts about what you should say, what you should do, and how you can make the other person understand the pain they cause. The temptation to react immediately is powerful because emotional pain often demands an emotional response. But one of the most important lessons in life is that emotional reactions and emotional strength are not the same thing. Many people believe strength means expressing every feeling the moment it appears. They think power comes from having the last word, winning the argument, or making sure the other person feels the same hurt they created. Yet time and time again, people discover that emotional decisions made in moments of pain often create consequences they later regret. Think about how many people have sent messages they wish they could take back. How many have made desperate phone calls late at night? How many have posted something online hoping someone specific would see it? How many have chased, argued, begged, or lashed out, only to feel worse afterward? In the heat of the moment, those actions feel justified. Later, they often become reminders of how much control emotions had over the situation. Emotional control is different. Emotional control does not mean suppressing your feelings or pretending you don't care. It does not mean becoming cold, distant, or emotionless. It means learning how to experience your emotions without allowing them to dictate your actions. It means recognizing that feelings are temporary, but decisions can have lasting effects. One of the strongest things a person can do is pause before reacting. When you're hurt, every part of you may want immediate relief. You want to say something. You want to respond. You want to defend yourself. You want justice. But emotional maturity teaches you to ask an important question. Will this action improve my future, or am I simply trying to satisfy a temporary emotion? That question alone can save people from countless mistakes. The reality is that many people who play games, manipulate others, or behave carelessly are often expecting a reaction. They expect anger. They expect chaos. They expect emotional pursuit. They expect to remain the center of your attention even after they've hurt you. When your entire focus stays on them, they continue occupying space in your mind and influencing your emotions. Emotional control breaks that cycle. It shifts your focus away from trying to control another person's behavior and toward controlling your own response. And that is where real power exists. You cannot control whether someone lies. You cannot control whether someone leaves. You cannot control whether someone appreciates your value, but you can control how you respond. You can control how much access they have to your peace. You can control where your energy goes. Many people spend months trying to change another person's mind while neglecting their own growth. They become consumed with proving a point. They want validation. They want acknowledgement. They want the other person to finally understand what they lost. In doing so, they unintentionally surrender control of their emotional well-being. The strongest people understand that their peace is too valuable to be handed over so easily. They refuse to allow another person's actions to determine their self-worth. They refuse to let temporary emotions sabotage long-term goals. They recognize that every moment spent obsessing over someone else's choices is a moment stolen from their own future. There is also something incredibly attractive and respectable about emotional discipline. People often assume confidence comes from speaking the loudest or demanding attention. In reality, confidence often appears as calmness under pressure. It shows up when someone remains composed during difficult situations. It appears when a person can experience disappointment without losing their dignity. Anyone can react when things go wrong. Anyone can become angry. Anyone can lose control. But not everyone can remain focused when emotions are intense. Not everyone can choose growth over drama. Not everyone can stay committed to their goals while carrying emotional pain. That level of discipline separates those who remain stuck from those who move forward. Another important truth is that emotional control protects your future relationships as well. Unhealed anger has a way of following people into new chapters of life. If you never learn how to manage emotions effectively, old wounds begin influencing new opportunities. Distrust replaces openness. Fear replaces confidence. Bitterness replaces hope. But when you develop emotional discipline, you carry wisdom instead of baggage. You learn from painful experiences without allowing them to define you. You become stronger without becoming harder. You become wiser without becoming cynical. You become more careful without becoming fearful. That balance is incredibly valuable. At the end of the day, emotional control is not about winning an argument or proving a point. It is about protecting your peace. It is about ensuring that temporary pain does not create permanent damage. It is about refusing to let another person's poor decisions determine the quality of your future. The person who hurt you may never understand your value. They may never apologize. They may never change. But your growth does not depend on any of those things. Your growth depends on your ability to remain focused when life gives you every reason to become distracted. Your strength is not measured by how loudly you react. It is measured by how wisely you respond. And when you master that skill, you gain something far more valuable than revenge. You gain control over your own life, your own peace, and your own future. One of the biggest misconceptions people have after heartbreak is believing that happiness comes from watching the person who hurt them suffer. They imagine a future where that person finally realizes their mistake, comes back full of regret, and admits they lost someone special. In their mind, that moment becomes the ultimate victory. They think it will heal the pain, restore their confidence, and make everything feel worthwhile. But the truth is that building your life around someone else's regret is still a form of emotional dependence. Even though the relationship may be over, your happiness remains connected to their actions. You're still waiting for them to think a certain way, feel a certain way, or respond a certain way. In other words, they still have influence over your emotional state. Real freedom begins when you stop measuring your success by another person's reaction. The most powerful thing you can do after being hurt is not making someone regret losing you. The most powerful thing you can do is creating a life so meaningful, fulfilling, and exciting that whether they regret it or not becomes completely irrelevant. That's where true success begins. Success is not always about money, status, or achievements. Those things can certainly be part of it, but real success is much deeper. It is waking up with peace. It is feeling confident in who you are. It is pursuing goals that matter to you. It is building healthy relationships. It is taking care of your physical and mental well-being. It is knowing that your happiness is no longer tied to someone else's choices. After a painful breakup or betrayal, many people make the mistake of putting their lives on hold. They stop pursuing opportunities. They lose motivation. They spend countless hours thinking about the past. They become emotionally trapped in a chapter that has already ended. Meanwhile, life continues moving forward. Days become weeks. Weeks become months. Months become years. And without realizing it, they sacrifice valuable time waiting for something that may never happen. The people who recover most effectively understand something important. Your future deserves more attention than your past. Instead of asking why someone left, they start asking how they can grow. Instead of focusing on what they lost, they focus on what they can build. Instead of chasing closure, they chase purpose. That shift changes everything. Every successful transformation starts with small decisions. You decide to get out of bed even when you don't feel like it. You decide to take care of your health. You decide to pursue goals you've neglected. You decide to reconnect with friends, family, and passions. You decide that your story will not end with disappointment. At first, these actions may seem insignificant, but over time, they create momentum. Confidence begins to return. Energy begins to return. Hope begins to return. And slowly, you start becoming someone stronger than the version of yourself that entered the relationship. One of the most beautiful things about personal growth is that it changes your perspective. The person who once seemed impossible to forget no longer occupies every thought. The relationship that once felt like the center of your world becomes one chapter in a much larger story. The pain that once felt unbearable becomes evidence of how far you've come. You begin to realize that your life contains far more possibilities than you originally believed. This is often the point where regret enters the picture for the other person. Not because you chased them, not because you begged them, not because you tried to prove your worth, but because they see the contrast. They see someone who continued growing despite the pain. They see someone who refused to remain broken. They see someone who built a meaningful life instead of staying trapped in resentment. And contrast creates awareness. People often fail to appreciate what they have until they compare it to what they lost. However, here's the irony that many people never expect. By the time their regret arrives, you may no longer need it. The validation you once desperately wanted loses its importance because you've already built confidence from within. The apology you once dreamed about loses its power because you've already found peace without it. The attention you once craved becomes less meaningful because your life is now filled with purpose. That's why success is such a powerful response to heartbreak. Success doesn't just improve your circumstances, it changes your mindset. It teaches you that your worth was never dependent on another person's ability to recognize it. It teaches you that rejection is not proof of inadequacy. It teaches you that another person's poor decision does not determine your value. Many people spend years trying to convince others of their worth. They exhaust themselves seeking approval, validation, and acceptance. But the strongest people eventually learn that self-respect is more valuable than external approval. When you truly value yourself, you stop chasing people who fail to value you. When you truly value yourself, you stop settling for less than you deserve. When you truly value yourself, you begin making decisions that align with your future rather than your fears. And that's when life starts changing in remarkable ways. New opportunities appear, new relationships develop, new goals emerge, new levels of confidence become possible. You stop living as a victim of what happened and start living as the author of what comes next. The goal was never to make someone regret losing you. The goal was always to become the kind of person who no longer needs that regret to feel complete. Because the greatest success after heartbreak isn't hearing someone say, "I made a mistake." The greatest success is looking at your life one day and realizing that the pain which once threatened to break you became the reason you discovered your strength. And when that happens, you win in a way that no apology, no explanation, and no regret from another person could ever match. Here's a strong emotional outro that matches the tone and style of the speech. Before we finish, I want you to remember one thing. The person who played you does not get to decide how your story ends. They may have hurt you. They may have disappointed you. They may have left you with questions you'll never get answers to. But they do not have the power to define your future unless you hand them that power. And that's a choice only you can make. Starting today, stop measuring your worth by how someone treated you. A person's inability to recognize your value does not reduce your value. A person's rejection does not make you unworthy. A person's betrayal does not make you unlovable. The truth is, some people lose good things because they don't know how to appreciate them. That's their lesson, not yours. Your lesson is to learn, grow, heal, and become stronger than you were before. Your lesson is to stop chasing people who are running away from you and start chasing the life you deserve. Your lesson is to understand that every setback can become a setup for something greater if you refuse to quit on yourself. One day, you're going to look back at this painful chapter. You're going to remember the tears, the sleepless nights, the disappointment, and the heartbreak. But you're also going to realize something incredible. You survived it. You grew through it. You became wiser because of it. You became stronger because of it. And the person who once had the power to hurt you will no longer have the power to affect your peace. That's real healing. That's real growth. And that's real victory. So hold your head high, protect your heart, know your worth, and never forget this. The best way to respond to someone who played you is not with revenge. It's with success. It's with confidence. It's with happiness. It's with a life so fulfilling that you no longer need anyone's apology, validation, or regret to feel complete. Because when you reach that level, you've already won. And when you've already won, what they think about you no longer matters. Thank you for listening. Now go focus on becoming the greatest version of yourself. Your future is waiting.